What if I told you that the most expensive piece of gear sitting right there on your face is exactly why you are not catching fish? You heard that right. We need to talk about your polarized fishing glasses and why they are actively deceiving you about where the deep drop-offs really are. Today, I am going to reveal a massive optical illusion that is ruining your casts and keeping your bait completely out of the strike zone. You will discover exactly why you keep coming up empty-handed on spots that look absolutely perfect. Let me ask you a question to kick things off, and I want you to answer honestly down in the comments. How much money did you pay for your favorite pair of polarized shades? And do you blindly trust what they show you? For decades, this has been a deeply ingrained habit in the fishing community. We have all been taught that buying a premium pair of polarized lenses is the absolute key to reading the water. We believe the old grandfatherly advice that light water is shallow and dark water is deep. We spend years, sometimes our entire lives, pitching our expensive lures directly at the exact line where the light meets the dark, assuming it is the edge of a steep, glorious ledge. But we do this completely blindly. We repeat the same pattern for 40 years, without ever realizing that the basic physics of light and water are playing a massive trick on our brains. We trust the gear more than we trust our own hands. You step out onto the deck of your boat, slip on those $200 polarized shades, and suddenly you feel like a superhero. You look at the water and see a sharp, dark line that screams deep water. It is a drop-off, right? Well, let us talk about the science of what you are actually seeing. When light passes from the water into the air, it bends. This is called refraction. Your expensive lenses cut the glare on the surface, which is great, but they do absolutely nothing to fix this bending of light. In fact, by removing the surface glare, they give you a false sense of confidence in that bent image. You think you are looking straight down at a ledge, but you are actually looking at a displaced image of that ledge. The physical structure is not exactly where the dark water starts. It might be a few feet to the left, or a few feet deeper than it appears. We have all been taught that finding the edge is the key to finding the fish, but if you are casting directly at that visual line, you might just be dropping your bait into the worst possible spot. Have you ever wondered why you can see the perfect structure, make the perfect cast, and still come up empty-handed? It is because your eyes, aided by those trusty lenses, are feeding your brain bad data. Picture this scene. It is early in the morning, the sun is just starting to peek over the trees, and the lake is as flat as a mirror. The silence is absolute, broken only by the occasional splash of a baitfish. You idle up to your favorite spot, kill the engine, and stand up on the casting deck. With your polarized glasses on, you scan the water. Right there, about 30 feet away, you see a distinct color change. It goes from a light sandy brown to a deep, mysterious green. Every instinct you have developed over 20 years of fishing tells you that is the mother lode. That is the drop-off where the big ones are waiting to ambush their breakfast. So, you pitch your jig right onto the edge of the light water, expecting it to tumble down into the dark abyss. But instead of falling, your line goes slack immediately. You reel down, lift the rod tip, and realize your heavy jig is just sitting in 2 feet of water, miles away from any actual depth change. What happened? In the early morning light, shadows stretch out across the lake bottom. That dark patch you saw was not a drop-off at all. It was just a long shadow cast by a small weed patch or a submerged boulder. Your glasses cut the surface glare beautifully, but they sold you a complete lie about what was actually down there. We need to have an honest conversation about the psychology of buying fishing gear. When we spend $150 or even $300 on a pair of high-end polarized sunglasses, we expect magic. We read the marketing materials that promise high-definition vision, enhanced contrast, and the ability to see right through the water like we have X-ray vision. Because we invested so much hard-earned money into this tool, we desperately want to believe every single thing it shows us. It is a classic case of confirmation bias. We see a dark spot, our expensive glasses tell us it is a deep hole, and our brain locks onto that belief. We refuse to question it. We will sit there for an hour, casting into a completely barren area, telling ourselves that the fish just are not biting today. We never stop to consider that the drop-off we are fishing does not actually exist. The truth is, these glasses are just a filter. They are a tool to manage light, not a magical depth finder. By blindly trusting the brand name on the frame, we abandon our basic fishing instincts. We stop feeling the bottom with our baits and start relying entirely on a visual illusion. It is time to break that habit and realize that even the most expensive gear can deceive you if you do not know how to interpret the information it provides. Let us dive a little deeper into the physics of why your eyes are being tricked. Water is vastly denser than air. Because of this density, light travels slower through water than it does through the atmosphere. When the sunlight hits the surface of the lake, reflects off the bottom and travels back up to your eyes, it hits the boundary between the water and the air and changes direction. Think about a time you looked at a straight stick resting half in and half out of the water. It always looks broken or bent right at the surface. Now, apply that same exact optical illusion to an entire underwater landscape. That steep, glorious ledge you see dropping into the darkness is suffering from that very same broken stick effect. The steeper the drop-off, the more distorted the visual edge becomes from your vantage point above the water. Your polarized lenses clear up the window by removing the reflection of the sky, but you are still looking through a funhouse mirror. This means the visual edge of the drop-off and the physical, tangible edge of the drop-off are rarely in the exact same place. If you are targeting a narrow strike zone on a steep ledge, being off by just 3 or 4 feet because of this light bending effect is the difference between setting the hook and just practicing your casting. There is a massive myth passed down from generation to generation in the fishing community. Your grandfather probably told you this, and his grandfather probably told him. The rule goes like this: light water is shallow, dark water is deep. It sounds like common sense, and it is usually the first thing we look for when we put our polarized glasses on. But relying solely on color changes to find deep drop-offs is a dangerous game. Yes, deep water absorbs more sunlight and therefore looks darker. However, not all dark water is deep. You could be looking at a dense patch of dark green coontail weed lying flat on the bottom in 4 feet of water. You could be looking at a layer of dark muck or decaying leaves that has settled over a shallow sand flat. You might even be looking at a massive school of baitfish hovering near the surface, blocking the light from reaching the bottom. Your polarized glasses will make all of these things look like a sudden, deep hole. If you just chase the dark spots without verifying what is causing the contrast, you will spend half your day fishing over a pile of dead leaves, thinking it is a 20-foot hole. The glasses do not tell you what is making the water dark. They just highlight the contrast. It is up to you to figure out if that contrast is actually a depth change. One of the most frustrating ways your polarized sunglasses can lie to you involves changes in bottom composition. Imagine you are drifting along a flat that is uniformly 6 feet deep. Suddenly you see a stark, straight line where the bottom turns from a light sandy color to pitch black. Your heart rate jumps. You have found the ledge. You cast your lure out, let it sink, and wait for that familiar tick on the line. But the lure hits bottom almost instantly. You drag it back and realize the water is still exactly 6 feet deep. What you actually found was not a drop-off, but a transition line where a sandy bottom abruptly turns into a field of dark chunk rock or a dense bed of submerged grass. Your polarized lenses made this transition pop with incredible clarity. The contrast was so sharp, so defined, that your brain immediately interpreted it as a sudden change in depth. This optical illusion is incredibly common, especially in clear water lakes. The glasses do their job by showing you the bottom details, but they lack the ability to give you a 3-dimensional perspective. To the naked eye, aided by a polarized filter, a stark color change on a flat bottom looks identical to a steep vertical drop. If you do not recognize this trick, you will waste precious hours fishing a flat rock transition as if it were a deep water sanctuary. We often forget how much the environment above the water affects what we think we see below the water. Let us talk about shadows. When you are fishing a shoreline with tall pine trees or on a day with fast-moving, puffy white clouds, the lighting on the water is constantly shifting. You might be staring intently at a specific spot, wearing your trusted shades, and you see a distinct dark band parallel to the bank. It looks exactly like a secondary drop-off. You position the boat, get ready to fire a cast, and suddenly, the drop-off completely vanishes. It just disappears into thin air. What happened? A cloud shifted, or the sun moved just enough behind a tall tree on the bank, and the shadow that was creating your imaginary drop-off moved away. Polarized glasses are fantastic at highlighting shadows on the lake bottom, but they cannot tell the difference between a shadow cast by an underwater ledge and a shadow cast by a cloud 10,000 feet in the sky. If you're not paying close attention to the angle of the sun and the weather conditions above you, you will find yourself casting at ghosts. I have seen veteran anglers spend 20 minutes trying to find a deep hole they swore they just saw, only to realize they were tracking the shadow of a large oak tree moving across a shallow flat. The time of day you are fishing drastically alters how reliable your visual reading of the water will be. The angle of the sun is the ultimate dictator of the polarized illusion. Early in the morning or late in the evening, when the sun is low on the horizon, the light hits the water at a severe angle. Most of this light bounces off, creating massive glare. Your glasses work overtime to cut this glare, but the low light angle means the light penetrating the water is illuminating the bottom unevenly. This creates elongated shadows and makes gentle slopes look like severe, jagged drop-offs. Conversely, during midday, when the sun is directly overhead, the light penetrates straight down. This is when your polarized glasses are supposedly at their most accurate. However, this direct overhead light completely washes out subtle depth changes. Because there are no shadows being cast by the underwater structures, a drop-off that falls from 5 feet to 15 feet might look like a continuous flat plane. Your glasses will show you the bottom clearly, but without the shadows to provide depth perception, you will drive right over the best ledge on the lake without even noticing it. Understanding how the sun angle manipulates your vision is crucial if you want to stop being fooled by your own eyes. There is a very specific visual phenomenon that happens when you look into the water from an elevated position, like standing on the deck of a bass boat. It is called the foreshortening effect. Because of how light bends, objects underwater appear larger and closer to the surface than they actually are. When you look out and see the dark edge of a drop-off, the refraction is pulling that image toward you and pushing it upward. Let us say the actual physical ledge is 30 feet away from the nose of your boat. Because of the foreshortening effect amplified by the clear view through your polarized lenses, that ledge might appear to be only 20 feet away. Your brain processes the visual distance. You make a 20-foot cast, and your bait lands 10 feet short of the actual structure. You are now fishing in the barren, shallow water, completely missing the strike zone on the edge of the drop. This happens constantly. We trust the distance our eyes calculate, but we forget that the water is distorting that calculation. The clearer the water, the more pronounced this illusion becomes. You might swear you can reach out and touch a submerged boulder on the edge of the drop, but when you stick your rod tip down to poke it, you realize it is 7 feet deep and a good distance away. Because of the visual tricks the water plays, fishermen constantly fall into the trap of overcasting. Let us imagine you are targeting a steep ledge where the water drops from 4 feet down to 20 feet. You are wearing your glasses, you see the dark line, and you know the fish are suspended right on the vertical face of that drop. To compensate for the optical illusion, or perhaps because the water is playing tricks on your depth perception, you throw a long cast well past the visual line. You think you are being smart, ensuring your bait covers the entire drop. But because your glasses distorted the actual location of the ledge, you have thrown your lure 20 feet past the structure into the shallow flat. Now you spend the first half of your retrieve dragging your bait through unproductive, shallow water, likely picking up snot grass or debris along the way. By the time your lure actually reaches the real drop-off, its action is ruined by a clump of weeds, or you are retrieving it too fast because you are impatient. Overcasting based on a false visual cue wastes a massive amount of time. You are spending the majority of your cast in dead water, all because your polarized glasses gave you a skewed map of the underwater terrain. You have to learn to question the exact position of the line you see. On the flip side of the coin, undercasting is just as common and arguably more detrimental when trying to fish deep drop-offs. You see the sharp contrast where the light bottom meets the dark abyss. You want to drop your jig right on the nose of a waiting fish, so you make a precise, soft pitch right to the edge of the dark water. You watch your line sink, expecting it to take a long time to hit the bottom, but it stops almost immediately. Why? Because the dark water you aimed for was not the start of the drop-off. It was a suspended shadow or a displaced visual image. The actual ledge starts 5 feet further out. Because you trusted the exact visual line your glasses gave you, you dropped your bait short. Now your lure is sitting on the top lip of the structure in 3 feet of water, while the fish are stacked up at the 10-foot mark, just a few feet away. You are fishing too shallow, completely blind to the fact that you missed the drop entirely. I cannot tell you how many times I have seen a guy complain that the fish just are not on the ledge, when in reality, his bait has never even touched the ledge. His glasses showed him a boundary. He cast to it, and he fell right into the trap of the underwater optical illusion. I learned this lesson the hard way a long time ago, and it completely changed my perspective. I was fishing a local reservoir, struggling to get a bite, when an old guy in a beat-up aluminum boat idled past me. I was wearing my brand-new, ultra-expensive Polarized shades, feeling like a pro. I asked him if he was having any luck. He smiled, held up a stringer of massive crappie, and asked me what I was targeting. I pointed to a distinct dark line in the water, and proudly said I was fishing that deep ledge. He chuckled, a deep, raspy laugh, and said, "Son, that is not a ledge. That is a sunken bridge pillar laying flat on the mud in 5 feet of water." I did not believe him. My glasses clearly showed a drop-off. He told me to go over and probe it with my rod tip. I trolled over, stuck my rod straight down, and sure enough, I hit solid concrete just a few feet under the surface. The water did not drop off at all. The old man tapped his temple and said, "Your eyes will lie to you, but lead never lies." That conversation shattered my absolute faith in polarized glasses. It made me realize that visual cues are just a starting point, a suggestion of what might be down there. Relying on them without verification is a fool's errand. So, if we cannot trust what we see through our polarized lenses, how do we actually find the real drop-off? The answer lies in the old man's advice: lead never lies. You need to use your fishing rod as a physical depth finder. When you see that dark line or that promising color change, do not immediately assume you know where the structure is. Instead, tie on a heavy football jig or a heavy Carolina rig. Cast it out past the visual line and drag it back slowly. Close your eyes if you have to, and just feel what the bait is doing. You will feel it dragging on the shallow flat, then suddenly the resistance will vanish and the bait will plummet. That exact moment, when the tension drops and the line starts peeling off the spool, is the true location of the drop-off. It will almost never perfectly align with the dark visual line you saw through your glasses. By dragging a heavy piece of lead, you are mapping the bottom with your sense of touch, which is immune to the optical illusions of refraction, shadows, and water clarity. Your glasses are a great tool for giving you a general area to investigate, but your heavy jig is the lie detector that tells you exactly where the deep water begins. The degree to which your glasses will deceive you is heavily dependent on the clarity of the water you are fishing. In deeply stained or muddy water, polarized glasses are mainly just protecting your eyes from the sun. They are not going to show you drop-offs anyway, but in ultra-clear water, the deception reaches its maximum potential. When you can see the bottom in 15 or 20 feet of water, your brain struggles to comprehend the depth. The water is so transparent that it removes the visual cues we normally use to judge distance. You might look down and see a rock pile that appears to be just under the surface, only to realize it is 20 feet down. This extreme clarity acts like a magnifying glass, intensifying the foreshortening effect we talked about earlier. In clear water, a subtle roll in the bottom contour can look like a sheer cliff face because the contrast is so perfectly preserved by your lenses. Conversely, a sheer drop can look completely flat if the lighting is just right. You have to constantly remind yourself that the clearer the water, the more severe the optical illusion. Do not let the beautiful high-definition view fool you into thinking you have a perfect understanding of the underwater topography. We rarely get to fish on water that is perfectly flat and calm. Most days there is a breeze, and that breeze puts a chop or a ripple on the surface of the water. These ripples act like thousands of tiny shifting prisms, while your polarized glasses do a fantastic job of cutting the broad glare bouncing off the tops of the waves. They cannot stop the light from refracting in a million different directions as it passes through that choppy surface. When you try to look at a deep drop-off through wind-blown water, the visual edge will appear to shimmer, move, and distort. It is like trying to read a book through a glass block window. You might see a dark patch that looks like a ledge, but as the wind shifts, the patch seems to move 10 feet to the right. This is because the surface turbulence is constantly changing the angle at which the light bends before it reaches your eyes. If you make a cast based on a moving, shimmering visual target, you are basically throwing darts blindfolded. You have to recognize that when the wind picks up, the reliability of your polarized vision drops significantly. The glasses will help you see through the glare, but they cannot fix the severe distortion caused by the physical shape of the waves. Another critical mistake anglers make when relying solely on their glasses is focusing too much on the edge and ignoring the transition zone. A drop-off is rarely a perfect 90-degree angle. It usually has a lip, a slope, and a base. Your polarized glasses tend to highlight the most extreme point of contrast, which is usually the very top edge, where the shallow water meets the drop. Because the glasses draw your eye exclusively to this sharp visual line, you tend to ignore the actual slope itself. However, the fish are often not sitting right on the top edge. They might be suspended halfway down the slope, or holding tight to a piece of cover at the very base of the drop in the deep water. By obsessively casting at the visual line your glasses provide, you are completely missing the transition zone where the fish are actually feeding. The visual illusion compresses the drop-off, making it look like a two-dimensional line rather than a three-dimensional ramp. You have to train yourself to look past the stark line of contrast. Use the visual edge as a marker, but understand that the real fishing happens on the invisible slope that drops away beneath it. To really understand why we get fooled, we have to talk about how the human brain processes visual information. Our brains evolved to judge distance, depth, and shape in the air, not through a dense liquid medium like water. When we put on polarized glasses, we feed our brain a high-contrast image of a foreign environment. The brain takes shortcuts. It sees a dark area next to a light area, and because of our earthly experience, it immediately concludes that the dark area must be a deep hole or a shadow cast by a tall object. The brain completely ignores the complex physics of refraction and water density because it simply is not wired to calculate them on the fly. This means that the deception is not a failure of your eyes, and it is not necessarily a failure of your expensive sunglasses. It is a failure of human visual processing. We are essentially trying to run a modern software program on prehistoric hardware. Knowing this is incredibly empowering. It means you can consciously tell yourself to stop trusting your immediate visual instincts when you are on the water. You have to actively override your brain's natural tendency to believe the simple, contrasting image it sees through those polarized lenses. The ultimate goal is not to throw your expensive polarized glasses in the trash. They are still an incredibly vital piece of fishing equipment. The secret is learning how to blend the visual cues they provide with the physical feedback from your fishing rod. Think of your glasses as a scouting tool. You stand on the deck, scan the water, and look for those anomalies, the color changes, the dark lines, the shadows. When you spot one, you do not immediately assume it is a drop-off. You log it in your mind as a point of interest. Then, you pick up your heavy jig or your deep-diving crankbait, and you use it to interrogate that point of interest. You cast beyond the visual anomaly and work your bait through it. You are waiting for the physical confirmation that matches the visual cue. If you see a dark line, and your jig suddenly falls into deep water right at that spot, fantastic, your visual cue was accurate. But if you drag your jig through the dark patch, and the bottom remains completely flat, you immediately know your eyes were lying. By constantly verifying your visual data with physical rod feel, you build a mental map of the lake that is based on reality, not on optical illusions. This blending of sight and touch is the hallmark of a truly master angler. This entire concept requires a fundamental shift in how you approach a new fishing spot. Imagine idling into a cove you have never fished before. The water is clear and the sun is high. Your glasses reveal a beautiful winding dark line following the contour of the shoreline. In the past, you might have dropped the trolling motor, rushed up to the front, and started bombing casts directly at that line, fully expecting to haul in a giant. But now, armed with the knowledge of the polarized lie, you take a breath. You stop the boat a little further back. You acknowledge that the dark line is a great starting point, but you accept that the actual drop-off might be 5 feet in front of it, 10 feet behind it, or it might just be a shadow from the tree line. You start casting in a fan pattern, probing the area systematically with a bottom contact bait. You pay close attention to your line tension and the vibration in your rod handle. You are methodically searching for the physical depth change, using the visual line merely as a loose guideline. This patient, analytical approach prevents you from wasting time casting into dead water based on a mirage. It saves you from frustration and drastically increases the amount of time your bait spends in the actual strike zone. As we wrap up this deep dive into the illusions of the water, I want to leave you with a final, unbreakable rule of thumb. Trust but verify. Your polarized fishing glasses are amazing tools that cut glare, protect your eyes from harmful ultraviolet rays, and reveal incredible details about the underwater world. But they are not flawless depth finders, and they cannot correct the fundamental laws of physics that cause light to bend and distort when it hits the water. Every time you see a sharp drop-off, a deep hole, or a stark color change, force yourself to doubt it just a little bit. Ask yourself if it could be a weed line, a shadow, a change in bottom composition, or simply the broken stick effect playing tricks on your depth perception. Do not let a $200 piece of plastic dictate your entire fishing strategy without getting a second opinion from the heavy lead tied to the end of your line. If you can master the discipline to question what you see and rely on what you feel, you will stop casting into barren water. You will find the hidden sweet spots that everyone else is missing, and you will undoubtedly put more fish in the boat. The water is a master of deception, but now you have the tools to see right through the lies. To sum it all up, the biggest and most unexpected twist in all of this is that the clearest water and the most expensive glasses actually combine to create the biggest lie. The refraction of light and the foreshortening effect mean that the drop-off is rarely exactly where you see it. Understanding this changes everything about how you fish. It forces you to stop fishing by sight alone and start fishing by feel, turning you into a much more accurate and successful angler. Thank you so much for watching. If this video helped open your eyes to what is really happening under the surface, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. Now I want to hear from you. What is the biggest mistake you have ever made trusting your eyes on the water? Drop a comment below and let's get a discussion going.